it talks, let's take a look. Life and hope in every book.
Welcome everyone. This is where you take a huge amount of information, sometimes really complex stuff, and boil it down to those key insights, those moments where things just click.
Those aha moments.
Exactly. And today we're doing something I think really special, a unique kind of deep dive. We're not just looking at the story itself, but really digging into how it's told, how it sings through its poetic language. Our source material today, it's incredibly ancient selected excerpts from the book of Genesis. And our mission, our goal here, is to really unpack its rich, poetic language. We think you'll find some surprising facts, some profound insights hidden right there in the words themselves.
Absolutely. It's about that linguistic tapestry, as you say.
So have you ever stopped to consider how the actual words, the phrasing, the structure of an ancient text like Genesis can tell a story that goes way beyond just the obvious narrative? How it speaks to truths that honestly still resonate thousands of years later.
And that's precisely our focus today. We're zeroing in on what you might call the narrative artistry of Genesis. We'll be looking closely at specific word choices, the literary devices woven right into the text, and those underlying narrative structures.
As you might just read past normally.
Exactly. They're often overlooked if you're just reading for the plot, but they're absolutely crucial for getting to a deeper understanding. They give us these glimpses into ancient ways of thinking, into what the text is really trying to convey about, well, divine purposes and the human experience.
Right.
And by connecting these linguistic dots, looking at these patterns, we can uncover some really profound theological ideas that are actually, deeply intertwined with everyday human life. It helps make those complex layers much more accessible, helping you gain knowledge quickly, but also thoroughly.
Okay, so the focus is on how the story is told, the artistry, the deeper truths hidden in the language.
Right.
And what better place to start than, well, the very beginning. Let's dive into section 1, the canvas of creation, looking at the poetic depths in Genesis chapters 1 through 4.
That's good.
We have to start with those incredibly famous opening words.
Yeah.
In the beginning. What's the immediate power you feel from that phrase? And thinking about someone trying to really grasp this text, what are the first interpretive questions that just jump out from those words based on our sources?
Well, in the beginning, it immediately sets this huge cosmic stage, doesn't it? It powerfully affirms that the world we know, everything around us, it's entirely a product of God's creation.
Right, establishes the foundation.
But right away, the language itself kind of invites us into a deeper interpretive question. Our sources highlight two main ways people have understood this very first verse.
Okay.
The first view sees it as referring to the absolute original act of creation, like the very first moment God brings everything into being, maybe out of nothing.
Creation ex nihilo.
Potentially, yes.
Yeah.
And in this view, the next verse, Genesis 1.2, which describes the earth as without shape and empty, that's seen as what's called a disjunctive clause, meaning it sort of breaks the sequence. It's not the next step in day one's creation work, but rather it's describing a pre-existing chaotic state that God then begins to order starting from verse 3.
Okay, so option 1. Verse 1 is the absolute start. Verse 2 describes a chaos that was there before day one's ordering began. What's the other view?
The second interpretation, and the narrative itself seems to strongly favor, sees verse 1 more as a concise summary statement, like a title for the whole chapter.
Ah, like an introduction.
Exactly. It summarizes the entire creative work that's about to be detailed in verses 3 through 31. In this perspective, the chapter is primarily about God fashioning the world as we currently experience it, bringing order and function.
So it's less about the absolute origin of matter itself.
In Genesis 1 itself, perhaps yes. While other parts of the Bible, like John 1.3, definitely teach creation ex nihilo, this view suggests Genesis 1.1 is the grand heading for the account of ordering the cosmos. And the text supports this summary view because, well, the heavens, or the sky as we know it, didn't exist until the second day, according to verse 8. And the earth, or dry land, not until the third day, verse 10.
Right, so the things mentioned in verse 1 aren't fully formed until later.
Precisely. Which means that primordial state described in verse 2, without shape and empty, darkness over the watery deep, isn't necessarily part of day one's sequence of events, but rather it's crucial background information. It sets the stage.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
The structure itself is guiding us. So the original Hebrew isn't suggesting the earth became chaotic after some initial perfection.
Exactly. That interpretation, and the earth became formless and void, which some have used to argue for a gap theory, suggesting a judgment between verse 1 and verse 2. Well, the Hebrew grammar just doesn't really support it.
How so?
The way Genesis 1.2 begins, grammatically, it functions as background information, a description of the state before God starts speaking things into ordered existence in verse 3. If it were meant to be the next event in a sequence, the Hebrew would typically use a different verbal construction, the vav consecutive. The way it's written points to it being descriptive background, not sequential action.
It's like stage directions in a play, setting the scene before the action starts.
That's a great analogy. It highlights the text's careful construction right from the start. It's not just a list of events, it's deliberately structured. And that's often an aha moment for people who've maybe only heard the gap theory explanation.
That attention to the original language, the grammar, it's just crucial. Now let's talk about the divine language. The text uses God, which in Hebrew is Elohim. You mentioned this is a plural form. What does that tell us? Is it hinting at multiple gods or something else?
That's a really significant point people often ask about. Elohim is indeed grammatically plural in Hebrew. And this is the crucial detail, whenever it refers to the one true God of Israel, like it does throughout Genesis 1, it's consistently paired with the singular verb.
Ah, okay. So the grammar itself signals it's referring to one entity.
Exactly. So it's not meant to indicate a numerical plurality within the Godhead, at least not in a way the original audience would likely have grasped in terms of later Trinitarian doctrine. The most widely accepted understanding is that it's a plural of majesty or intensity.
Like the royal we.
Sort of, but maybe even grander. It's a stylistic choice in Hebrew used to stress God's inherent sovereignty, his ultimate authority, his sheer greatness and incomparability. It positions him as the God of gods, the supreme reality. It conveys grandeur, not necessarily number.
So it's about how great God is, not how many. That makes sense. And the verb create, bara, how is that word used here? Does it always mean creating something out of absolutely nothing?
Bara is a fascinating verb. It's used exclusively in the Bible for God's creative activity, never for human making. It captures that unique essence of divine action, fashioning something new, fresh, perfect. But here's a key insight, something that might genuinely surprise people. Bara doesn't necessarily always mean creation out of nothing ex nihilo, which is often the default assumption.
Really? How do we know that?
The text itself shows us. For instance, in Genesis 1.27, bara is used for the creation of humankind, but we know from Genesis 2 that humans were formed from pre-existing dust.
Ah, okay. So it's used even when there's existing material.
Precisely. So instead of always implying creation from absolute zero, bara often emphasizes God's unique power in forming anew, reforming, renewing, or bringing something into its perfect intended state. Think of Psalm 51.0, create bara in me a clean heart, or Isaiah 65.1 about creating new heavens and a new earth. It's about a divine act of making something perfect and new, whether from nothing or by transforming what exists. This subtle distinction really reshapes how we understand God's creative power here. It's not just a one-off event, but potentially a continuous perfecting work.
That's a huge distinction. It's about the quality and divine origin of the act, making something distinct, perfect, new, not strictly about the starting materials. That really does challenge a common assumption. And we also see God naming things. He does this 7 times in the chapter. Is that just, labeling things, or is there more going on?
Oh, it's much more than just labeling. The act of naming, or sometimes blessing, which often follows a creative act, is highly significant in the ancient world, and especially here.
Right.
Well, in some other ancient Near Eastern creation stories, like the Babylonian Enuma Elish, naming was actually considered equivalent to creating. To give something a name was to give it existence.
But that's not what's happening in Genesis.
No, it's different here. In Genesis, God creates first, then he names. So the act of naming isn't about giving being, but it's a powerful indication of his sovereignty, his absolute authority over what he has made. Think of a king naming a conquered city, like in 2 Kings 23.34. It's an act of claiming ownership, defining its function, and asserting control.
So it's about defining and distinguishing.
Exactly. It's about bringing order, setting boundaries, defining roles. We see this emphasis on definition and division reinforced by the repeated phrase, after their kinds, or min in Hebrew, used for plants and animals.
Right. That phrase appears multiple times.
It underlines God's deliberate concern with defining and dividing time, space, and species. It's all about establishing order as opposed to chaos. The idea is that what God distinguishes is not to be confused or mixed inappropriately, a principle that gets echoed later in the law, like in Leviticus 19.19 or Deuteronomy 22.911, which prohibit mixing different kinds of seeds, animals, or fabrics.
Wow, so this foundational act of naming and distinguishing in Genesis 1 actually sets a precedent for later laws about maintaining God's created order. It's like the legal framework is embedded right from the start.
In a sense, yes. It establishes the principle that God's order is good and should be respected.
Okay, speaking of things that challenge our modern thinking, let's talk about light. The text says light was created on day 1, but the sun, moon, and stars, the light bearers, weren't made until day 4. That seems backward to us, doesn't it?
It might seem strange to our modern scientific minds, yes. But it probably wouldn't have seemed odd at all to the ancient Hebrew audience.
Why not?
Well, think about how they observed the world. They saw light appearing at dawn before the sun was visible over the horizon and lingering at dusk after the sun had set. So the idea of light existing somewhat independently of the sun wasn't counterintuitive to them. Light was an observable phenomenon in itself.
Okay, so based on observation.
Mhm.
But is there a deeper theological reason for this order?
Absolutely. Many scholars believe the deliberate design, creating light first, then later creating the greater light and lesser light without even using the common names for sun and moon, is a powerful polemic against idolatry.
How does that work?
In the surrounding cultures of the ancient Near East, the sun and moon were often worshipped as powerful deities. By presenting them simply as created objects, as functional lights made by God for the specific purpose of serving his creation, marking seasons, days, and years, the text demotes them. It strips them of any inherent divinity.
It puts them in their place, so to speak.
Precisely. It reinforces the absolute sovereignty of the one creator God and prevents the reader from falling into the common trap of worshiping celestial bodies. It's a radical statement for its time. These things are just part of creation, tools made by God, not gods themselves.
That's a brilliant insight. It's both grounded in ancient observation and making a profound theological statement. And throughout this creation account, there's this feeling of overflowing life, isn't there? The text uses phrases like swarm with swarms. How does the language itself convey that sense of abundant vitality?
Yes, the language is incredibly vibrant there. The Hebrew uses what's called a cognate construction, basically using the verb and noun from the same root together, like swarm with swarms, or literally let the waters teem teeming creatures, to emphasize intensity and abundance.
It's like saying really, really swarm.
Exactly. It conveys a sense of overwhelming fertility, teeming life, rapid and vibrant movement. You also see the pole form of the verb for swarming flight used for birds, adding to this feeling of dynamic, abundant life filling the newly created spaces.
Is this theme of abundance found elsewhere?
It is. It's a recurring theme connected to divine blessing. In fact, this same verb for swarming or teeming is used later in Exodus 1.7 to describe the incredible rapid growth of the Israelite population during their time of bondage in Egypt.
Ah, so it connects God's creative blessing here with his blessing on Israel later on.
Yes, it shows a consistent pattern. God's blessing results in abundant life and growth, even in challenging circumstances. And it's also really notable that the specific verb bara, create, which we talked about earlier, after appearing in the opening summary statement, its first use within the actual narrative sequence of the days comes in verse 21.
And what's it used for there?
It's used specifically for the creation of the great sea creatures and every living creature that moves in the water and the birds.
Why is that significant?
Using bara here underscores that even these creatures, especially the great sea creatures, the Tananim are part of God's perfect creation. That word Tananim could refer to large sea animals, crocodiles, snakes, but it could also carry connotations of mythological sea monsters, often symbols of chaos or forces opposed to God in other ancient Near Eastern myths.
So by using bara here, the text is saying,
It's powerfully asserting that even these potentially awe-inspiring or fearsome creatures, the ones that might have been seen as rival deities or chaotic forces elsewhere, are simply creations under God's complete sovereign control. They are part of his good and ordered world. It drives home God's total dominion over everything, absolutely everything.
That's a powerful way to assert God's unique authority over all creation, even the parts that might seem wild or chaotic. Okay, so we've explored the grand cosmic canvas. Let's zoom in now to the very intimate creation of humanity. The text famously says, "Let us make humankind in our image, after our likeness." The plural us, our, it's always sparked so much discussion, hasn't it? Who exactly is this us?
It really has. That plural form, let us make, in Genesis 1.26, has been a focal point of theological discussion for centuries, and for very good reason. It's linguistically striking.
What's the most common interpretation, especially in Christian theology?
Well, many Christian theologians, looking back through the lens of later revelation, have seen this as an early, veiled hint of plurality within the Godhead and foreshadowing of the Trinity.
Okay, seeing the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit implied there.
Right. But our sources caution that while that's a valid theological reading from a later perspective, we need to be careful about imposing fully formed Trinitarian concepts directly onto this ancient text in a way that might not reflect the immediate understanding of its original audience.
That's a fair point, understanding it in its own context first. So if it's not necessarily an explicit reference to the Trinity for the original readers, what other explanations have been offered based on the ancient Near Eastern or Israelite context?
Several possibilities have been discussed. Some suggested it might be a plural of majesty, like the royal we mentioned earlier.
But you said that doesn't quite fit grammatically.
Exactly. Hebrew grammar generally doesn't use the plural of majesty with verbs in this way, so that explanation is usually discounted. Another idea is the plural of deliberation, where God is perhaps speaking to himself, pondering the decision.
Like thinking out loud.
Kind of, but the examples usually cited to support this, like King David in 2 Samuel 24.14 saying, "Let us fall into the hand of the Lord," or God in Isaiah 6.8 asking, "Whom shall I send and who will go for us?" Oh, don't actually fit that model perfectly. David speaks for Israel, and in Isaiah, God is clearly speaking on behalf of his heavenly council.
Ah, so that points toward the heavenly council idea again.
Precisely. That seems to be the interpretation that fits most naturally within the ancient Israelite worldview presented elsewhere in the Hebrew Bible. The picture is often of God presiding over a heavenly court or council of divine beings, angels, or messengers. We see glimpses of this in places like 1 Kings 22, Job 1 and 2, Psalm 82, and Isaiah 6.
So the idea is God is addressing this council.
Yes. In this view, God is announcing his intention to his heavenly court, inviting them, in a sense, to witness or participate in this climactic act of creating humanity. Maybe they participate through praise, as suggested in Job 38.7, where the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy at creation.
But God still does the actual creating.
Yes, the text makes that clear in the very next verse, verse 27. So God created humankind in his image. The creative act itself is attributed solely to God, but the plural us suggests the heavenly court might also possess the divine image in some way, perhaps related to their role in divine governance or rulership, since the image is often closely linked to representing authority or sovereignty.
So humanity is being created in an image shared, in some sense, by God and his council, perhaps emphasizing humanity's role as God's representatives, his rulers on earth.
That's a very plausible reading. It makes the creation of humanity this incredibly significant cosmic event, witnessed and perhaps even acclaimed by the heavenly court, setting humanity apart.
That adds a whole different dimension. And the term used, humankind, Adam, is that just referring to the male, Adam, or is it broader?
It's definitely broader. The Hebrew word Adam here in verse 26 refers to humankind collectively. It's clear from the context the following phrase uses a plural verb, that they may rule, and verse 27 explicitly states, God created Adam as male and female.
Okay, so it's inclusive from the start.
Absolutely. It's a collective singular noun. Later uses in Genesis, like in chapter 5, verse 2, male and female he created them and called their name humankind Adam, reinforce this collective meaning. It refers to humanity as a whole, comprised of both sexes, who together bear the image of God.
Got it. And along with being created in God's image, humanity receives a blessing and a command. The blessing is, be fruitful and multiply, and the command includes, subdue the earth. Let's unpack those. What does bless mean here?
In this context, bless primarily means to endow with the capacity to reproduce and be fruitful. It's not just a nice wish. It's God actively giving the power for life to flourish and multiply. We see this elsewhere, like when God blesses Sarah in Genesis 17.16, enabling her to bear a child, or Jacob blessing Joseph's sons in Genesis 48.16, linking the blessing to their becoming numerous. It's about divine enablement for growth and flourishing.
Okay, so it's an empowering and subdue kabosh. It sounds potentially harsh, like conquer or dominate.
It can have that connotation in some contexts, yes, but here, in the context of God's good creation and humanity's role as stewards, it's generally understood less as an adversarial command to brutally dominate nature and more about bringing the earth under humanity's wise management for its benefit.
So, more like stewardship.
Exactly. Think of it as harnessing its potential and using its resources for your benefit. This would involve things the ancient Israelites understood well: cultivating fields, mining for useful materials using timber for building, domesticating animals for work and food. It's about bringing the created order into productive service for human flourishing, exercising responsible dominion, not reckless exploitation.
Responsible dominion, harnessing potential. That sounds quite different from just conquering. And what was humanity's very first task within this garden setting, this framework of stewardship?
Man's initial role, as described in Genesis 2.15, was to work it and to keep it, referring to the Garden of Eden. The word work, abad, often means to cultivate or serve, and keep, shamar, means to watch over, guard, or preserve. So it implies a careful nurturing role, maintaining the beauty and order of the garden sanctuary.
Which is different from the work after the fall.
Significantly different. After the fall, humanity is condemned to cultivate the resistant soil outside the garden through painful toil. The initial task was one of pleasant stewardship within a perfect environment. Also, Genesis 2.16 gives us the very first command in the Bible, using the verb sava.
The command not to eat from the one tree.
Right. And the appearance of this verb sava, to command, right here is crucial. It emphasizes that God created humans with the inherent capacity to understand and obey him, and then immediately gave them a specific command to test that capacity. It wasn't an afterthought. Moral choice and accountability were built in from the beginning. This first command was, in essence, lesson 1 in moral discernment and wisdom. Trust and obey God's word.
So free will and the possibility of obedience or disobedience were fundamental right from the start. Then Adam is tasked with naming the animals. Is this just a scientific classification exercise, or is there more to it?
It's definitely more than just cataloging. Firstly, as with God's naming acts, Adam naming the animals is an exercise of the dominion, the sovereignty granted to humanity. Assigning names implies understanding, categorizing, and having authority over the creatures.
Okay, an act of rulership.
Yes, but the text adds another fascinating layer. Genesis 2.19 says God brought the animals to the man to see what he would name them. And verse 20 concludes, "But for Adam there was not found a helper corresponding to him."
So the process itself revealed something.
Exactly. The act of naming, of surveying all the creatures, led Adam to the profound recognition of his own uniqueness and his deep need for a different kind of companionship, a partner who truly corresponded to him, someone like himself. It wasn't just about ruling the animals, it was also a journey of self-discovery, highlighting his relational need that the animal kingdom couldn't fulfill.
Which leads perfectly into the creation of Eve. And the man's reaction is so poetic. This one at last is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. What makes this part stand out linguistically? It feels much more elevated than simple prose.
It absolutely is. This exclamation is a distinct poetic section within the narrative. It bursts forth with emotion and deep recognition. The phrase, bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh, is a powerful idiom expressing the closest possible kinship, identity, and essential correspondence between the man and the woman. She's fundamentally like him, derived from him, sharing his very nature.
And there's wordplay involved too, isn't there?
Yes, and it's brilliant. The text highlights the paronomasia, the wordplay between the Hebrew word for woman, which is isha, and the Hebrew word for man, which is ish.
They sound very similar.
They do. It sounds like isha is just the feminine form of ish. Now, strictly speaking, from an etymological perspective, looking at word origins, they aren't directly related. They likely come from different roots.
But the sound connection is intentional.
Absolutely. The author deliberately uses this sound similarity, combined with the immediate context of her being created from the man, to create an incredibly effective and memorable impression of their deep, inherent connection and unity. The sound and the sense work together perfectly. It's a masterful piece of literary artistry that powerfully conveys their design complementarity.
That's fascinating. A subtle linguistic layer that drives home the intended unity. Okay, let's transition now. We've seen the beauty and order of creation, the intimacy of human origins. But things take a turn. Section 2, Echoes of Choice. From blessing to brokenness, focusing on Genesis 3 through 9. We have to start with the temptation and the fall in Genesis 3 and 4. That tree of the knowledge of good and evil, it feels symbolic, more than just a tree with fruit, right? What are the layers of meaning there? What was really at stake?
Yes, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil is loaded with symbolic weight. It's central to the whole drama. Scholars have debated its precise meaning for centuries, but a few key interpretations help us grasp what's likely intended.
What's one view?
One perspective sees good and evil here not just in a moral sense, but in a broader sense of what enhances life versus what diminishes or destroys it. So, gaining this knowledge would mean acquiring the godlike ability to decide for oneself what is beneficial and what is harmful, to essentially control life's outcomes based on one's own judgment.
Taking control away from God's definition of good.
Exactly. Another, perhaps more common view focuses on the moral dimension, knowledge of good and evil as the capacity to discern between moral right and wrong. The text itself seems to support this because in Genesis 3.6, the fruit is perceived as desirable for making one wise. And wisdom certainly includes moral discernment.
But there's a catch, isn't there? It gives the knowledge, but maybe not the ability to choose the good.
That's the crucial, tragic irony. This kind of wisdom, this moral discernment, is presented as something characteristic of divine beings. The serpent promises in 3.5, you will be like God or divine beings, Elohim knowing good and evil. And God himself confirms in 3.22, see, the man has become like one of us, knowing good and evil.
So they did gain something godlike.
They gain the knowledge, yes. But the prohibition against eating was fundamentally a test of trust and obedience. Would humanity be satisfied with their God-given role, learning wisdom God's way, through relationship and obedience? Or would they grasp for that divine-level knowledge on their own terms, trying to ascend to God's level independently?
Choosing autonomy over dependence.
Precisely. That initial command not to eat was essentially lesson 1 in practical wisdom. Trust God, respect his boundaries. By disobeying, they seized the knowledge, but they did so in an act of rebellion. And the tragedy is, once they have this knowledge, their nature is corrupted. They know good and evil, but they are now inclined toward evil, unable to consistently choose the good. That's why they're banished from the garden to prevent them from eating from the tree of life and achieving immortality while in this fallen, corrupted state.
It's a profound reversal. In seeking wisdom their own way, they lost the true wisdom of obedience and relationship and gained a knowledge that only highlighted their own brokenness. It's deeply poignant. Now, the serpent, what's its role? Is it just a talking snake? Or is it meant to be Satan from the get-go? And how clever is its language?
The identity of the serpent is another area with layers of interpretation. Later theological reflection, especially drawing on passages like Revelation 12.9, that ancient serpent, who is called the devil and Satan, identifies the serpent as Satan, the spiritual force behind the temptation.
Right, that's a common understanding.
It is, but within the immediate context of Genesis 3 itself, the text is actually quite understated. It introduces the serpent simply as more crafty than any other wild animal that the Lord God had made. Later, it's cursed to crawl on its belly by 14. So textually, it's presented as one of God's creatures, albeit uniquely shrewd or cunning.
What about other ancient interpretations?
Ancient Jewish sources offer different perspectives too. The Book of Jubilees suggests that perhaps all animals could speak before the fall. Josephus, the first-century Jewish historian, attributed the serpent's actions to jealousy. Seeing the blessings promised to humans if they obeyed, it acted maliciously to cause their downfall. So there's a spectrum of views, from a literal crafty animal to a vehicle for a malevolent spiritual force.
So regardless of its precise identity, its cleverness is undeniable. How does the text highlight that linguistic manipulation?
Oh, the serpent's words are a masterclass in subtle deception. It starts by questioning God's command, slightly twisting it, did God really say? Then it directly contradicts God, you will not surely die. Finally, it appeals to their pride and desire for elevation. Your eyes will be opened and you will be like divine beings, Elohim, who know good and evil. It targets their deepest desires.
And the description of the fruit itself plays into this.
Absolutely. Genesis 3.6 says the woman saw the tree was good for food, a delight tava to the eyes, and desirable nekmad to make one wise. These words tava, attractive, desirable, lust, and nekmad, desirable, precious, are powerful synonyms emphasizing the overwhelming appeal. Interestingly, the verbal roots of these words appear in the Ten Commandments and the prohibition against coveting, Deuteronomy 5.21.
Wow, another linguistic link.
Yes, it subtly connects the act here with the sin of coveting, suggesting that intense, illicit desire often leads to taking what is forbidden. Furthermore, the verb used later by Eve to describe the serpent's action is nasha, meaning deceived or tricked. verse 13. This verse has a rich range of meanings in Hebrew.
Like what?
It's used elsewhere for kings misleading their people, allies betraying each other, God himself deceiving sinful people as judgment, false prophets giving false hope, and even pride causing self-deception. Using Nasha here highlighted the complex, multifaceted nature of the serpent's deception. It wasn't just a simple lie, but a deep manipulation, twisting truth, exploiting desire, and leading to ruin.
That linguistic footprint is so revealing about the nature of temptation itself. The consequences, of course, are devastating. And the text seems to employ a kind of poetic justice in describing them. Let's start with Abel's blood crying out after Cain murders him.
Yes, that's an incredibly powerful image in Genesis 4. God says to Cain, "The voice of your brother's blood is crying to me from the ground." It's a vivid personification. The shed blood isn't silent. It actively cries out for justice, like a human witness testifying in court against the murderer.
It's like the earth itself is horrified and demanding vengeance.
Exactly. It underscores the sanctity of life, that innocent blood violently shed leaves a stain on the land and demands a response from God. It's a visceral depiction of the immediate and cosmic consequence of murder.
And then God warns Cain before the murder, using that striking image of sin crouching at the door. What does that animal imagery convey?
God's warning in Genesis 4.7 is another piece of powerful imagery. Sin is crouching rovets at the door. The word rovets typically describes an animal lying down or crouching, often a predator ready to pounce. It's zoomorphism giving sin animal characteristics.
So sin is like a wild beast waiting to attack.
Precisely. It portrays sin not as some abstract concept, but as an active, dangerous, predatory force lurking, ready to seize control. Some scholars note that an Akkadian cognate word refers to a type of demon, leading to the interpretation. Sin is the demon at the door. Either way, it's a stark warning about the imminent, aggressive nature of temptation and the need for vigilance and mastery.
And the warning continues. Its desire is contrary to you, but you must rule over it. That word desire, tashiko you mentioned, it connects back to the curse on the woman in Genesis 3. This seems like a crucial linguistic link.
It absolutely is. This Hebrew word tashiko is quite rare, appearing only 3 times in the Old Testament. Its use here in Genesis 4.7 describing sin's desire for Cain, and in Genesis 3.16 describing the woman's desire for her husband, creates a deliberate and powerful parallel.
And what does that parallel suggest about the nature of this desire?
In both contexts, the most compelling interpretation is that tashiko refers to an urge, a desire to control or dominate. Sin desires to control Cain, to master him for evil purposes. But God tells Cain, you must rule over it. It implies a struggle, a battle for mastery, but crucially, it suggests sin can be resisted and overcome through righteousness.
Okay, so sin wants to dominate, but mastery is possible. How does that apply to the woman's desire in Genesis 3.16?
In Genesis 3.16, part of the judgment oracle on the woman is, your desire to Shukah shall be contrary to your husband, but he shall rule Mashal over you. Following the parallel, this suggests that in the fallen world, the woman will have a desire to control or dominate her husband. However, the consequence, the judgment, is that he will dominate her instead. The verb mashal clearly implies powerful control, domination, or mastery.
So it's predicting conflict and a power struggle in marriage as a result of the fall.
Yes, that interpretation fits the context of a judgment oracle announcing the difficult realities of life after sin. It suggests that the harmonious partnership intended in creation will be marred by this struggle for control, becoming a new, unfortunate norm in human relationships. This one word, tashikwa, links the internal struggle against sin with the external relational struggles that result from the fall.
That's incredibly insightful how one word weaves together these core consequences of sin. It's not just a theological idea. It resonates deeply with observed human experience, doesn't it? That constant tension in relationships. And the curse on the man, in pain you shall eat of it, the ground, connects back to the theme of eating in chapter 3, creating that poetic justice you mentioned.
Exactly. It's a clear measure for measure dynamic. The whole fall narrative revolves around eating the forbidden fruit. The temptation involved eating, the sin was enacted through eating, the interrogation focused on eating. Did you eat? So, the consequence directly impacts eating. The serpent is cursed to eat dust. And the man who wrongly ate from the tree will now find his sustenance, his eating, fraught with difficulty. The ground itself becomes resistant, yielding food only through painful toil. His daily need to eat becomes a constant reminder of his disobedience.
A very fitting, if harsh, consequence. We also see Cain's internal state described vividly when his offering is rejected. The text uses idioms for his anger.
Yes, Genesis 4.5 says Cain became very angry, but the Hebrew idiom is literally, it was hot to Cain, suggesting he burned with anger. It's a visceral, internal feeling. And then it adds, and his face fell. This is another idiom, meaning his inner anger, perhaps mixed with dejection or depression, was visibly reflected in his countenance, his expression. It's a stark contrast to the idea of God's face shining upon someone in blessing, like in the priestly blessing in number 6. Cain's fallen face reflects his fallen heart.
The language really paints a picture of his internal turmoil. And then, after the murder, his defiant rhetorical question, "Am I my brother's guardian?" What does that reveal?
That question is just dripping with defiance and a complete abdication of responsibility. It's a sarcastic, dismissive response to God's inquiry. Cain knows exactly what happened, yet he pretends ignorance and then challenges the very notion that he should have cared for his brother. It's tragically ironic because, yes, in God's economy, we are meant to care for one another. His question reveals a heart that has become totally hardened, utterly lacking remorse, even when confronted directly by God.
A chilling response. And finally, the wordplay in the names Cain and Abel themselves. How do their names add to the story's artistry?
This is another brilliant example of how names in Genesis often carry deeper meaning or foreshadowing. For Cain, his name in Hebrew is Quain. When Eve gives birth to him, she says, "Quaniti ish it yhwh," which is often translated, "I have gotten a man with the help of the Lord." But the verb quaniti, from quana, sounds very much like his name Quain. It creates a sound play, a paronomasia. Some interpretations suggest quana can also mean create, so Eve might be saying, in effect, "I have created a man," perhaps thinking this is the promised offspring from Genesis 3.15.
So her words and his name are linked by sound, possibly reflecting her hope.
Possibly, yes. It adds a layer of potential meaning and maternal hope, which makes the outcome even more tragic. As for Abel, his name, Hivel, is the Hebrew word for breath, vapor, or vanity. It signifies something fleeting, transient, unsubstantial. Yes. It's an incredibly ominous name in retrospect. It functions as proleptic irony, tragically foreshadowing Abel's short life and his untimely premature death. His very name whispers his fate from the beginning. It's a masterful use of names to deepen the narrative's impact and sense of tragedy.
That's incredibly poignant, a name that carries the weight of destiny. Okay, let's go forward in the narrative. Section 2.2. Divine reckoning and renewal, covering the flood, the covenant with Noah, and the power of words in Genesis 6-9. Before the flood narrative really gets going, we encounter these mysterious figures, the Nephilim, in Genesis 6. What can the text tell us about them? Who or what were they?
The Nephilim are certainly one of the more enigmatic elements in Genesis. The meaning of the name itself is uncertain. Common suggestions relate it to falling or perhaps giants.
And what did the text say about them?
Genesis 6.4 describes them as being on the earth in those days and also afterward. It calls them the mighty warriors Gibborim, who were of old the men of renown. So they're depicted as figures of great power, legendary heroes from ancient times, perhaps suggesting a period of exceptional, maybe even violent human prowess before the flood.
And their origin. The text links them to the sons of God and daughters of humankind, right?
It does. Verse 4 mentions them in the context of the sons of God, often interpreted as angelic beings, though some argue for godly human lineages or rulers, taking wives from among the daughters of humankind. The implication seems to be that the Nephilim were the offspring of these unions. However, it's important to notice that the text actually stops short of stating this directly and unambiguously. It mentions the unions and then it mentions the Nephilim were on the earth.
So it implies a connection but doesn't explicitly state A plus B Nephilim.
Exactly. That slight ambiguity adds to their mystery. They remain these powerful, somewhat shadowy figures associated with the deep corruption that leads God to bring the flood.
And amidst this widespread corruption, this darkening picture, Noah stands out. The text emphasizes his righteousness and obedience. How does it do that linguistically?
Noah's obedience is really highlighted, especially at the end of chapter 6, verse 22. After God gives him all the detailed instructions for building the ark, the text concludes, Noah did this. He did all that God commanded him. But the Hebrew construction is even stronger. It's somewhat redundant for emphasis. And Noah did according to all that God commanded him, so he did.
That repetition hammers it home.
It really does. It underscores the completeness, the exactness, the thoroughness of Noah's obedience. In a world characterized by rebellion and doing what was right in their own eyes, Noah's meticulous adherence to all of God's commands stands in stark, powerful contrast. It highlights his singular faithfulness.
A beacon of obedience in a sea of corruption.
Okay, moving past the flood itself, God establishes a covenant with Noah. What's significant about the language used to describe this covenant? What does it promise? The covenant with Noah in Genesis 9 is foundational. God says, "I now confirm my covenant with you." The Hebrew verb here, hefil, perfect with vav consecutive, signals a decisive binding act. It's presented as an unconditional promise from God to Noah, his descendants, and indeed all living creatures.
Unconditional in what way?
God promises never again to destroy all life on earth with a flood. This promise isn't dependent on human obedience. It's a unilateral commitment from God, signified by the rainbow. It anticipates the later, more explicit statements of the covenant in verses 9, 11, and 17.
And the description of the flood waters receding, is there anything notable there?
Yes, the text describes the waters returning or receding using a combination of verb forms, qual preterite and infinitive absolute, that suggest continuous, ongoing action, going and returning, gradually diminishing over time, rather than just vanishing instantly. It gives a sense of the slow, natural process of the earth drying out.
And the dove returning with the olive leaf? You mentioned a specific particle there.
Ah, yes. Genesis 8.11 says the dove came back, and behold, Hinna, in her mouth was a freshly plucked olive leaf. That little word Hinna, often translated behold or look, is a deictic particle. It functions like the narrator pointing something out directly to the reader, drawing attention to it, inviting you to see it.
Like saying, wow, look at this.
Exactly. It makes the moment incredibly immediate and visually striking. It invites the reader to share in Noah's relief and hope, to enter into the story and see that tangible sign of new life emerging from the devastation. It's a wonderful touch of narrative artistry.
That really does make it feel present. Now, after the flood, God gives Noah and his family some new instructions, particularly regarding the sanctity of life and blood. Why was this so important at such a cataclysm?
It seems directly related to the immense destruction of life they had just witnessed. God explicitly commands in Genesis 9.4, "Only you shall not eat flesh with its life, that is, its blood." Life is profoundly connected to blood in Hebrew thought.
So avoiding blood is about respecting life.
Precisely. After the flood's carnage, God mandates this dietary restriction as a constant, tangible reminder of the sanctity of life, which belongs ultimately to God. It forbids humans from consuming the lifeblood, ensuring they recognize the sacred value of every living creature. The text even uses apposition to emphasize this. Your blood, that is for your life, directly linking the two. Life is a divine gift, not to be treated lightly.
And this respect for life then extends to human life, leading to the statement about capital punishment.
Yes, the principle is immediately applied to humanity in verse 6. Whoever sheds human blood, by human shall his blood be shed, for in the image of God has God made humankind. The justification for capital punishment here is grounded directly in the imago Dei, the image of God.
Because murder defaces God's image.
Exactly. Taking a human life is an assault on the very image of God, and therefore requires the most severe consequence to uphold the profound value and sanctity of that life. It sets a standard for justice and accountability in the post-flood world. And right after these serious commands, significantly, God reiterates the original creation blessing. And you, be fruitful and multiply, increase greatly on the earth and multiply in it, verse 7.
Connecting back to Genesis 1.
Yes, directly linking back to Genesis 1.28. It signifies a fresh start, a renewal of God's creative purpose for humanity to fill the earth, but now within a framework that includes a heightened awareness of the sanctity of life and the reality of human sin and divine judgment.
A renewed beginning, but with crucial lessons learned. Finally, in this section, we have the incident with Noah, Ham, and the curse pronounced on Canaan. What does the text emphasize here? Is the curse on Ham himself?
The text is actually very specific, and this is a point often misunderstood. Genesis 9.25 states, "Cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants shall he be to his brothers." The curse is explicitly pronounced on Canaan, who is Ham's son, not on Ham himself.
Why Canaan, not Ham, who is the one who acted disrespectfully?
It's presented as a prophetic oracle by Noah, likely based on the character revealed by Ham's disrespectful action. Seeing his father's nakedness and telling his brothers, unlike Shem and Japheth, who respectfully covered him. Noah, perhaps seeing a similar tendency passed down or foreseeing the future character of Canaan's descendants, pronounces this oracle about their future subservience.
So it's predictive based on character.
Yes, very much like Jacob's later oracles about his sons in Genesis 49, where he pronounces blessings or judgments based on their revealed character and actions. It's a narrative pattern. Character flaws observed in the ancestor lead to prophetic statements about the destiny of their descendants, often explaining future relationships, like the eventual subjugation of the Canaanites by Israel. It connects behavior to long-term consequences for the lineage.
Character is destiny, even on a national scale. Fascinating. Okay, let's move into the final major section, section 3. Journeys of Destiny, focusing on the narrative art in the patriarchal tales, from Genesis 10 through 50. We start with Genesis 10, the Table of Nations, and Genesis 11, the Tower of Babel. You mentioned earlier there seems to be a chronological puzzle. Genesis 10 lists nations already divided by language, but Genesis 11 describes the time when everyone had one language. How does the narrative structure resolve this?
This is a classic example of the sophisticated narrative artistry in Genesis. It's not necessarily a chronological error, but a deliberate literary technique.
What technique is that?
The text often presents the result or the explanation of an event after narrating the situation it explains. So Genesis 10 gives us the Table of Nations. It's introduced with the heading Toledot, meaning generations or account, but it covers more than just genealogy. It lists cities, tribes, nations, and significantly notes they were arranged according to their languages. For example, 10.5, 20, 31. It shows the world as it became.
Okay, the outcome first.
Exactly. Then Genesis 11 steps back and provides the explanation for how that linguistic diversity came about, the story of the Tower of Babel. It's an intentional structure. Show the scattered world, then explain the event that caused the scattering. It builds narrative interest.
That makes perfect sense as a storytelling choice. And the description in Genesis 11.1, the whole earth had one language and the same words.
The Hebrew literally says one lip and one set of words. Lip here is used as a metonymy, a figure of speech where a related thing stands for the thing itself. So one lip stands for one common language, and one set of words likely refers to a shared vocabulary or perhaps shared purpose. It paints a picture of initial human unity.
But a unity used for ambition. The builders at Babel had grand plans, didn't they? And the language reflects their hubris.
Oh, absolutely. Their ambition is palpable, and the text highlights it linguistically. They express their plan using cohortative verbs expressing strong intention or self-encouragement. Come, let us make bricks. Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be dispersed over the face of the whole earth.
Let us. It sounds very self-reliant.
Extremely. They want to reach the heavens, likely referencing the Mesopotamian ziggurats, which were seen as connecting points to the divine realm, artificial mountains reaching the god's dwelling place. Their goal is self-glorification, make a name for ourselves, and self-preservation through forced unity, lest we be dispersed, directly counter to God's apparent intention for humanity to fill the earth.
And how does God respond linguistically?
Here's the brilliant irony and narrative symmetry. God responds using the very same grammatical form, the cohortative, but in the plural, likely referring back to the divine council. Come, let us go down in there, confuse their language, so that they may not understand one another's speech.
Wow, let us confuse.
Precisely. God's divine action directly mirrors and decisively thwarts their human ambition. It underscores God's sovereignty and the futility of human attempts to usurp his authority or build kingdoms based solely on human pride. And there's another subtle link. The name Peleg appears in the genealogy in Genesis 10.25 with the note, "For in his days the earth was divided Peleg." While this could refer to geological division, it's more likely, given the context and word usage elsewhere, like Psalm 55.9 using Peleg for dividing tongues, that it anticipates or refers back to the division of languages at Babel, further connecting these chapters thematically.
These linguistic echoes and symmetries are just incredible. Okay, from the scattering of nations, the narrative zooms in on one man, Abram. His call in Genesis 12 is absolutely foundational. How is God's promise structured in that call? What does the language reveal?
The call itself begins with a very direct personal imperative, leklaka. It's often translated go or go forth, but it literally means something like go for yourself or go to yourself. It carries a sense of deep personal significance, a journey that will define Abram's very being and destiny.
More than just travel.
Much more. And this initial command, this imperative, is immediately followed by a series of 3 verbs in the cohortative form again, but this time expressing purpose or consequence from God's side.
So go, so that I may, or go, and then I will.
Exactly, go, and I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you, and I will make your name great. It establishes a conditional promise. Abram's obedience in going unlocks these divine actions.
Okay, his action enables God's blessing.
Yes. And then comes the second imperative, which seems grammatically subordinated to the promises, so that you will be a blessing. This indicates God's ultimate, overarching purpose in calling and blessing Abram. It wasn't just for Abram's own sake.
He's meant to be a conduit.
Precisely. He is blessed in order to be a blessing to others. I will bless those who bless you, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. It's a call that starts personally but has universal global implications right from the beginning. The structure itself reveals this dynamic of obedience, blessing, and purpose.
Obedience unlocks blessing, and the purpose of blessing is to bless others. That's a powerful framework. Now, in Genesis 13 and 14, we see Lot making his choice, looking towards the fertile plains near Sodom. What's highlighted linguistically there, especially concerning Sodom's fate?
The text makes a point saying, Lot lifted up his eyes and saw that the Jordan Valley was well watered everywhere. Genesis 13.10. That phrase, lifted up his eyes, often signals a deliberate, significant act of looking in Genesis. It calls attention to the importance of what is seen and the choice being made. In this case, a choice based purely on apparent material advantage, which tragically leads him towards Sodom.
A choice with dire consequences.
Indeed. And when Sodom and Gomorrah are eventually destroyed, the verb used is shaket. Genesis 19.29, CF 13.9, 18.2 AF, meaning destroy or ruin, often translated obliterated. Interestingly, this is the same root word used to describe the corruption of the earth before the flood, Genesis 6.1 and 12, and God's intention to destroy, mashtidim, them, Genesis 6.13.
Another echo, linking Sodom's destruction to the flood.
Yes, it creates a thematic parallel. Both narratives depict widespread wickedness leading to catastrophic divine judgment, from which only one righteous family, Noah's, Lot's, is spared. It reinforces this pattern of judgment and selective salvation. There's also a small detail in Genesis 14.10 about the valley of Siddim being full of pits of tar. The repetition of pits emphasizes their abundance, a geographical feature relevant to the battle described there. And the word for tar is kamor, bitumen, the same material used as mortar for the bricks at the Tower of Babel, Genesis 11.3.
Wow, so tar pits near Sodom and tar used at Babel.
Mm-hmm.
Subtly linking these locations associated with human pride or wickedness.
It certainly seems possible the author is creating subtle thematic connections through these details. And amidst all this conflict and impending doom, we meet Melchizedek in Genesis 14, the king-priest of Salem who blesses Abram in the name of God Most High, Creator Quono of heaven and earth. That title, Kona, emphasizes God as the originator and possessor of all things, an early and powerful affirmation of God's universal sovereignty, acknowledged even by this mysterious non-Israelite figure.
These threads connecting different parts of the narrative are just fascinating. Lastly, in this section, Genesis 15, God makes a formal covenant promise to Abram. There's an oath, and then that intriguing wordplay about his potential heir, Eliezer.
Yes, in Genesis 15, Abram takes a solemn oath, confirming his refusal to take spoils from the king of Sodom. He says, I have lifted my hand in an oath to the Lord. The grammar suggests an immediate decisive action. Here and now I raise my hand. It emphasizes the solemnity and binding nature of his commitment.
And the wordplay.
When Abram expresses his fear of remaining childless, he says his heir will be Eliezer of Damascus. Hebrew is a bit cryptic. And the son of acquisition stewardship of my house, Ben Meshech Be'eti, he is Damascene, Damasek, Eliezer. There's a very clear sound play between Meshech, acquisition stewardship, and Damasek, Damascus.
Meshech, Damasek, they sound alike.
Very much so. While not a strict etymological link, the paronomasia creates the strong impression, as the saying goes, that in the nomen is the omen. The name hints at the destiny. It linguistically reinforces Abram's fear that Eliezer the Damascene, the steward Ben Meshech, might indeed inherit everything if God doesn't provide a natural son. It makes God's subsequent promise of a son from his own body even more dramatic and challenging to Abram's current reality.
That's incredibly clever, using sound to underscore the dramatic tension. Okay, let's move into section 3.2. Family dynamics and divine providence, looking at wordplay and prophecy in Genesis 16 through 34. We start with another name change. Sarai becomes Sarah in Genesis 17. Is this just a minor alteration, or is there deeper significance?
Linguistically, Sarai and Sarah seem to be dialectical variations of the same name, both essentially meaning princess or perhaps queen. So the change isn't as dramatic in meaning as Abram, exalted father, becoming Abraham, father of a multitude.
So why the change then?
Like the change from Abram to Abraham, it functions symbolically. The name Sarai represented her past identity, perhaps linked to their origins in Ur. The new name, Sarah, given by God alongside the promise that she would bear a son and become a mother of nations and kings, Genesis 17.15-16, serves as a constant linguistic reminder of God's specific promise and her new, divinely ordained destiny. It marks a transition, pointing forward to the miraculous future God had planned for her, reinforcing the covenant promises.
A linguistic marker of a new beginning and a future promise. Now, the story of Hagar and Ishmael in Genesis 16 is filled with pain, but also with divine compassion. How do the names involved in that story reflect God's intervention?
The naming in this story is incredibly poignant and central to its meaning. When Hagar flees Sarai's harsh treatment and cries out in the wilderness, the angel of the Lord finds her and tells her to name her son Ishmael. This name literally means God hears.
Directly reflecting what just happened.
Exactly. It's a direct wordplay on God hearing Hagar's affliction and cries. Shama is the verb to hear. The name itself becomes a perpetual testimony that God hears the cries of the oppressed and responds. It's powerful.
And the place where this happens also gets a significant name.
Yes. Hagar herself names the well where she encountered the angel Bir Lahai Roy, Bor Lakai Roy. The meaning is debated, but a strong possibility is the well of the living one who sees me. Hagar recognizes that even in her desperate isolation, God saw her plight and intervened. It suggests God actively seeks out and cares for those who are marginalized and suffering.
God hears, God sees. The names encapsulate the message. What about the prophecy concerning Ishmael himself?
The angel gives a prophecy about Ishmael's character and future in Genesis 16:12. He shall be a wild donkey of a man, his hand against everyone and everyone's hand against him, and he shall dwell over against all his kinsmen. It's a vivid, somewhat harsh image.
A wild donkey. What does that imply?
It suggests a life of untamed freedom, independence, perhaps roaming in the wilderness regions, resistant to control. It also predicts a life marked by conflict, his hand against everyone. It paints a picture of a nomadic, fiercely independent people living somewhat apart, over against, from their relatives like the Israelites, which arguably reflects the later historical reality of the Ishmaelite tribes. It's a challenging destiny, but a distinct one, born from this moment of divine intervention.
The names and prophecies really carry the weight of the story. Let's turn back to Sodom's destruction in Genesis 18:19 and the disturbing aftermath with Lot and his daughters. What linguistic elements stand out there?
Well, first, when God is considering destroying Sodom, Abraham intercedes passionately. Later, when Lot is rescued, Genesis 19.29 explicitly states that God remembered Abraham and sent Lot out of the midst of the overthrow. That word remembered, zakar, in Hebrew means much more than just mental recall. It signifies God acting faithfully based on a previous commitment or relationship, in this case, acting on Abraham's plea to spare the righteous. God's remembering is always active and purposeful.
So God's memory is tied to his action. What about the sin of Sodom itself?
The nature of the sin is made clear when the men of Sodom surround Lot's house and demand that he bring out his visitors that we may know them, Genesis 19.5. The verb to know, yada, here is widely recognized as a euphemism for sexual relations, specifically, in this context, homosexual rape, as Lot's counteroffer of his daughters confirms the sexual intent. It portrays a city consumed by violent, aggressive sexual perversion and inhospitality.
A chilling use of euphemism. And Lot's escape. There's wordplay there, too.
Yes. When Lot is hesitant to flee to the mountains, he pleads to be allowed to go to a nearby small town, saying, "Look, this town is near enough to flee to, and it is little Mitzar. Let me escape there. Is it not little?" Genesis 19.20. Because of his plea, the town is then named Zoar, which sounds exactly like the word for little or insignificant. It's a direct wordplay linking the name of his refuge to the reason it was spared its smallness.
The name literally reflects his plea. And the sons born to Lot through his daughters. Their names seem intentionally negative.
They do. The narrative presents the origins of the Moabites and Ammonites, who would later be frequent adversaries of Israel, in a very negative light. Lot's older daughter names her son Moab, which sounds very similar to the Hebrew phrase mi'av, meaning from my father. The younger daughter names her son Ben-Ami, which literally means son of my people or son of my kinsmen. These names, born from incest, serve ideological and polemical purposes in the text, explaining the origins of these neighboring nations, while simultaneously casting them in a scandalous and negative light from Israel's perspective. So the naming itself is part of shaping the reader's perception of these future rival nations. Very interesting. Turning to Abraham's encounter with Abimelech, king of Gerar, in Genesis 20, another incident where Abraham passes Sarah off as his sister. What's striking about Abimelech's dream and Abraham being called a prophet?
Abimelech's dream is incredibly direct. God comes to him and says, "Behold, you are a dead man because of the woman whom you have taken, for she is a man's wife," Genesis 20.3. That phrase, "you are a dead man," hinakamet, is a highly rhetorical way of stating the absolute certainty of his impending doom if he doesn't rectify the situation immediately. It's a divine verdict hanging over him.
Intense. And Abraham's role.
God tells Abimelech that Abraham is a prophet Navi, and explicitly links this status to intercessory prayer. He will pray for you and you shall live, Genesis 20.7. This is the first time Abraham is explicitly called a prophet in Genesis. It connects the prophetic role not just with receiving revelation, but powerfully with the ability to intercede effectively with God on behalf of others. Abraham's prayer becomes the means of Abimelech's deliverance. So being a prophet includes this power of intercession. What about Abimelech's reaction afterwards?
After Abimelech restores Sarah and gives gifts, he makes a rather pointed, perhaps sarcastic remark to Sarah, referring to the silver given to Abraham. "It is a covering of the eyes for you before all who are with you. You are fully vindicated." Genesis 20.16. Some read this as a subtle rebuke, implying the gift is like a veil to cover the awkwardness or shame of the situation, directed pointedly to your brother. But more significantly, Abimelech's overall conduct his fear of God. His immediate action to right the wrong stands in stark contrast to Abraham's assumption that there is no fear of God at all in this place. It's deeply ironic.
The pagan king shows more integrity than Abraham expected.
Exactly. Abimelech's actions serve as proof that the fear of God was in that place, contrary to Abraham's cynical assessment. It's a humbling moment for Abraham and a challenge to easy assumptions about who fears God.
A recurring theme, it seems, assumptions being challenged. And we see a similar pattern with Isaac and Abimelech in Genesis 26. Isaac also claims Rebekah is his sister. How does the truth come out this time?
Yes, it's a clear echo of his father's behavior, showing how fear can lead to repeating mistakes across generations. Isaac tells the men of Gerar that Rebekah is his sister, fearing they might kill him for her. But Abimelech discovers the truth in a very specific way. Genesis 26.8 says Abimelech looked out a window and saw Isaac caressing Matzakek Rebekah, his wife.
Caressing. What does that Hebrew word imply?
Matzakek comes from the same root as Isaac's name, Yitzchak, which relates to laughter or play. Here, it suggests an intimacy, affectionate playing or fondling that was clearly inappropriate for a brother-sister relationship, but perfectly normal for a husband and wife. It was this intimate interaction that gave them away.
The action revealed the relationship.
Exactly. It leads Abimelech to confront Isaac directly, saying, "Behold, she is surely your wife. How then did he say, 'She is my sister'?" The evidence was undeniable. And interestingly, this chapter also recounts the naming, or perhaps reaffirmation, of the name Beersheba, well of the oath, or well of seven.
Didn't Abraham already name a well Beersheba?
He did, back in Genesis 21.31, after making a treaty, Shurvia oath, with Abimelech's predecessor, or perhaps the same king. But here in Genesis 26, Isaac also makes a treaty with Abimelech, and his servants dig another well, which they also connect to the name Beersheba, v33.
So why the repetition?
It likely shows how traditions evolve. While Abraham originally named the place, Isaac's later significant activities there, digging wells, making his own treaty, led subsequent generations to also strongly associate the name Beersheba with Isaac. It presents a layered history for the site, acknowledging both patriarchal connections rather than a contradiction.
That makes sense. A place gaining deeper meaning over time. Now let's turn to Rebekah's oracle about her twin sons, Jacob and Esau, back in Genesis 25. This oracle is given before they're even born, yet it shapes so much. What did it reveal, and how does it frame the drama that follows?
When Rebekah is troubled by the struggle within her womb, she inquires of the Lord and receives a crucial destiny-shaping oracle. 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples from within you shall be divided. The one people shall be stronger than the other. The older shall serve the younger. Genesis 25.23.
The older shall serve the younger. That's a direct reversal of the norm.
A complete reversal of primogeniture, the right of the firstborn. This divine decree, given before birth, immediately establishes God's sovereign choice and sets the stage for the entire conflict between Jacob and Esau. It also introduces a profound irony into the narrative.
How so?
Because all of Jacob's subsequent scheming, his deception to get the birthright and the blessing it, was entirely unnecessary from the perspective of God's revealed plan. God had already declared that Jacob, the younger, would prevail. Jacob's grasping, deceptive nature wasn't required to fulfill God's purpose, though God ultimately worked through it.
That really highlights Jacob's lack of faith, doesn't it? Trying to secure by his own cunning what God had already promised. And Jacob's name itself becomes part of this drama.
Yes. His name, Yaakov, Jacob, is related to the Hebrew word for heel, akwev, because he was born grasping Esau's heel. Originally, the name might have had a positive connotation, perhaps meaning, may he God protect, or signifying a rear guard, but his actions quickly give it a negative spin.
How does Esau redefine it?
After Jacob tricks him out of the birthright and later the blessing, Esau bitterly complains. linking Jacob's name directly to his deceptive actions. Is he not rightly named Jacob Yaakov? For he has supplanted Yaakov these 2 times, Genesis 27.36. Esau uses a verb form derived from the same root as Jacob's name, meaning to trip up, to supplant, to circumvent. So Esau's accusation permanently fixes that negative connotation onto Jacob's name. He is the supplanter, the trickster. It shows how actions can redefine even the meaning of a name.
Character shapes the interpretation of the name itself. What about Esau's attitude towards his birthright?
Genesis 25.34 gives a very blunt summary statement after Esau sells his birthright for a bowl of stew. Thus, Esau despised his birthright. The word despised, bazah, indicates he treated it as worthless, contemptible, valuing immediate physical gratification far above his long-term spiritual heritage and covenantal position. It reveals his impulsive, profane character.
A stark contrast to Jacob's, albeit flawed, desire for the blessing. And Isaac's reaction when he realizes he's been deceived.
It's described with incredible intensity. Genesis 27.33 says Isaac trembled very violently, or trembled with a great trembling exceedingly. This conveys profound shock, anguish, and perhaps even fear at the realization of what had happened, the irrevocable nature of the blessing given to the wrong son. His loud and bitter cry that follows underscores the depth of the emotional and spiritual crisis caused by Jacob's deceit.
The language conveys real trauma, and Rebekah's role in orchestrating this. Her instructions to Jacob.
Rebekah is clearly the mastermind. She tells Jacob, "Now, therefore, my son, obey my voice." Genesis 27.8, 13:43. That phrase, obey my voice or listen to my voice, is a common idiom meaning comply with my instructions, emphasizing her authority in the situation. Later, when urging Jacob to flee Esau's wrath, she downplays the duration, telling him to stay with Laban for a few days until your brother's fury turns away. Genesis 27.44. This turned out to be deeply ironic.
A few days become
20 years. And Jacob never sees his mother again. Her attempt to manage the situation through deception leads to unforeseen, long-term separation and sorrow. The narrative subtly underscores the tragic consequences that ripple out from their choices.
so much dramatic irony, and the consequences just keep unfolding.
Let's follow Jacob's journey in section 3.3. Divine encounters and family drama, looking at Genesis 28:34. His flight from home leads him to that profound dream encounter at Bethel. What's the significance of his naming the place?
Jacob's dream of the ladder or stairway connecting heaven and earth is a pivotal moment of divine revelation and reassurance for him as he flees alone. In response, he takes the stone he used as a pillow, sets it up as a pillar, pours oil on it, and names the place Bethel, which means house of God, Genesis 28.12.
So recognizing God's presence there. Yes, he declares, "Surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it. How awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven." The naming signifies his recognition of the sacredness of the site and his encounter with the divine. Importantly, he also makes a vow there, VV 20-22, promising that if God protects him and brings him back safely, then the Lord will be his God, and the stone will be God's house.
And does he follow through on that?
He does. Much later in the narrative, after his return to Canaan, God explicitly tells him to go back to Bethel and fulfill his vow. Genesis 35.1. Jacob then returns, builds an altar, and God reaffirms the covenant promises and the name Bethel. Genesis 35.6-15. So the initial naming is confirmed and deepened by a later official ritual marking the fulfillment of the vow and God's faithfulness over those 20 years. It shows Jacob's journey of faith coming full circle.
A journey marked by struggle, including his time with Laban. Wealth and deception seem to be major themes there.
Absolutely. The narrative portrays Laban as being quite obsessed with wealth and prosperity. When he first meets Jacob, his focus seems to be on Jacob's potential contribution. Genesis 29.14-15. Later, Laban explicitly connects his own prosperity to Jacob's presence, saying, "The Lord has blessed me for your sake." Genesis 30.27, but he consistently tries to manipulate Jacob's wages to his own advantage. Genesis 31.7. For Laban, wealth seems to be the primary measure of blessing and success.
Which inevitably leads to conflict with Jacob, who is also quite shrewd.
Exactly. It sets up a dynamic where Jacob uses his own cunning, perhaps divinely aided, Genesis 31.9-12, to outwit Laban regarding the flocks. Then there's Rachel's theft of Laban's household idols, the teraphim, Genesis 31.19, and Jacob's subsequent deception of Laban by fleeing secretly. It's a complex web of family intrigue, rivalry, and deception, fueled by self-interest and a struggle over perceived blessings, whether material or spiritual, represented by the idols.
A messy family drama indeed. But then Jacob faces perhaps his biggest challenge, the impending reunion with Esau. His prayer beforehand is quite moving.
It really is. Genesis 32:9-12 records Jacob's heartfelt prayer as he anticipates meat of Esau. It's a moment of genuine vulnerability and humility. He acknowledges his unworthiness. I am not worthy of the least of all the deeds of steadfast love and all the faithfulness that you have shown to your servant. He recalls his humble beginnings. For with only my staff I crossed this Jordan, and now I have become two camps. It shows a profound recognition of God's abundant blessing and provision over the past 20 years, and a deep dependence on God for deliverance from Esau. It marks a significant step in his spiritual transformation.
From the self-reliant trickster to someone acknowledging dependence on God. And then comes that mysterious wrestling match. What happens there? Who's he wrestling with?
This is one of the most enigmatic and powerful scenes in Genesis. Jacob is left alone, and a man wrestles with him until daybreak, Genesis 32:24. The identity of this man is deliberately ambiguous, but the context strongly suggests a divine encounter. The man cannot overpower Jacob through wrestling alone, so he strikes Jacob's hip socket, putting it out of joint with a mere touch, a sign of supernatural power.
A devastating touch.
Yes, leaving Jacob with a permanent limp. The man then gives Jacob a new name, Israel, explaining, "For you have striven Sarita with God Elohim and with humans and have prevailed." Jacob then asks for the man's name, but is refused. Jacob names the place Peniel, meaning face of God, saying, "For I have seen God face to face, and yet my life has been delivered."
So he wrestled with God himself.
That's the clear implication Jacob draws, and the traditional understanding. It's a profound struggle, both physical and spiritual, where Jacob clings desperately to God, demanding a blessing, and emerges transformed, wounded, but blessed, with a new name signifying his struggle and perseverance with both God and humans. The limp serves as a lifelong reminder of his dependence on the God he wrestled with.
An incredible encounter. And how does this impact his reunion with Esau immediately after?
The reconciliation scene in Genesis 33 is incredibly emotional. Esau, despite Jacob's fears, runs to meet him, embraces him, falls on his neck, kisses him, and they both weep. It's a picture of complete forgiveness and acceptance, a dramatic reversal of Jacob's expectations.
And Jacob's response connects back to Peniel.
Directly. Jacob says to Esau, "To see your face is like seeing the face of God, Pain Elohim, now that you have received me favorably." V10. This is a clear allusion back to the preceding episode at Peniel, Face of God. Seeing Esau's gracious acceptance feels to Jacob like confirmation of God's acceptance and deliverance. His prayer has been answered in Esau's unexpected welcome.
That's a beautiful connection. And the gift Jacob gives Esau.
Jacob insists Esau accept his large gift, calling it his blessing, Berkati. This is highly significant. He uses the very word for the blessing he stole from Esau 20 years earlier. It's a symbolic act of restitution, an attempt to repay or make amends for what he took, acknowledging Esau's forgiveness with a tangible sign of honor.
A powerful gesture of reconciliation. But Jacob doesn't go with Esau to Seir afterwards.
No, he makes an excuse and heads towards Succoth instead. VV 14-17. This might indicate a lingering caution or perhaps even distrust on Jacob's part, suggesting that old habits of self-preservation haven't entirely vanished. Or perhaps more positively, it aligns with God's earlier command for him to return specifically to the land of his fathers, Canaan, Genesis 31:3, rather than settling in Esau's territory of Edom. The narrative leaves it slightly ambiguous.
Interesting. And the final major incident in this section is the violation of Dinah in Genesis 34 and the brutal revenge taken by her brothers. What stands out linguistically or thematically?
The chapter begins by noting Dinah went out to see Leroy, the daughters of the land. The verb suggests she went to observe, perhaps out of curiosity, which tragically leads to her encounter with Shechem and her violation. Her brothers, Simeon and Levi, react with fury, calling Shechem's act a disgraceful thing, Nevelah in Israel, which ought not to be done. Nevelah signifies a gross violation of moral and social order, an outrageous offense against the family and community honor.
And after their violent revenge, there's a moment of cleansing.
Yes. Following this traumatic event, Jacob leads his household in a significant act of purification. He instructs them to put away all the foreign gods, L.A. Haneker among them, Genesis 35:2. They give him these idols, and he buries them under the oak near Shechem, which is significantly identified later as Alon Beketh, Oak of Weeping, associated with the burial of Rebekah's nurse, Deborah. This burial of idols marks a turning point, a deliberate rejection of pagan influences, and a renewed commitment to the God of Bethel.
A symbolic fresh start. And the reaction of the surrounding cities.
After the massacre of the Shechemites, around them so that they did not pursue the sons of Jacob. This terror or fear is presented as divinely induced, preventing retaliatory attacks from the Canaanites. It shows God's protective hand over Jacob's family, even in the aftermath of their own violent actions, preserving them to fulfill his covenantal purposes.
Divine protection amidst human messiness. Okay, let's shift focus now to the final major narrative arc. Section 3.4. Joseph's Saga Dreams, Deception and Discernment, covering Genesis 37 through 45. We start, of course, with Joseph's dreams. What do they reveal, and how does the narrative use them to set up the story?
Joseph's two dreams in Genesis 37, the sheaves of grain bowing down and the sun, moon, and 11 stars bowing down, are clearly prophetic, foreshadowing his future rule and his family's eventual dependence on him. The narrative emphasizes their impact.
How so?
Firstly, the text uses that particle hina, behold, or look, again, when Joseph recounts them, lending vividness and immediacy to the dream reports, drawing the listener right in. Secondly, the dreams immediately provoke strong reactions. His brothers respond with jealousy and hatred. Do you indeed intend to reign over us? While his father Jacob, although rebuking him, also kept the matter in mind.
Jacob ponders it, suggesting he sensed their significance.
Exactly. It hints that Jacob recognized the potential divine origin of the dreams, even while questioning their implication. His rhetorical question, will myself and your mother and your brothers indeed come to bow ourselves to the ground before you, is heavy with dramatic irony, because, of course, that is precisely what will happen later in Egypt. The dreams function as the catalyst for the plot, revealing God's plan for Joseph's exaltation while simultaneously fueling the conflict that leads to his initial downfall.
The irony is thick right from the start. Now, Genesis 38 interrupts the Joseph story with the account of Judah and Tamar. It feels like a detour, but is it significant? What about the naming of Perez and Judah's admission?
It does seem like an interruption, but it serves crucial thematic and genealogical purposes. Tamar, twice widowed by Judah's sons and then denied her right to marry the third son according to Levirate custom, takes matters into her own hands by disguising herself to ensure the family line continues through Judah himself.
A desperate measure.
Extremely. But the outcome is significant. She bears twins, and during the birth, one puts his hand out first, then withdraws it, and his brother Zerah is born, followed by the one who put his hand out. He is named Peretz, which means breach or breaking through, referring to his dramatic entry into the world.
And what's the significance of Perez?
Perez becomes the ancestor of a major clan in Judah, including King David, and ultimately is listed in the genealogy of Jesus Christ, Matthew 1. His breaking through signifies the unexpected continuation of the promised line through Tamar's risky yet ultimately vindicated actions. It also subtly affirms the theme of the elder serving the younger, or the unexpected one prevailing, as Perez, though perhaps conceived second, breaks through first and his line becomes dominant. And Judah's reaction when the truth comes out is pivotal.
What does he say?
He declares, "She is more righteous than I, since I did not give her to my son Shelah." Genesis 38.26. This is a remarkable moment of self-awareness and public admission of guilt from Judah. He recognizes that Tamar, despite her deceptive methods, was acting within her rights to secure offspring for his deceased sons, a duty he had failed to uphold. It marks a significant turning point in Judah's character development, paving the way for his later leadership role.
So this seemingly unrelated story actually highlights crucial themes of lineage, justice, character transformation, and God working through messy human situations. Fascinating. Back to Joseph, now in Potiphar's house in Egypt, Genesis 39. How was his time there described?
Joseph's time with Potiphar initially shows God's favor dramatically. The text repeatedly states, "The Lord was with Joseph, and he became a successful man." The word translated successful, salah, means he prospered, things went well for him, he made progress in his work.
God's blessing is evident.
Clearly. So much so that Potiphar recognizes it. His master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord caused all that he did to succeed in his hands. Potiphar entrusts everything to Joseph, and verse 5 explicitly says, Potiphar's household was blessed by the Lord for Joseph's sake. This shows that God's blessing through Joseph extends even to the Egyptians around him.
But then comes the temptation from Potiphar's wife.
Yes. The text says she lifted up her eyes toward Joseph, again using that phrase suggesting deliberate, focused attention in this case, lustful intent. Joseph famously refuses her advances, citing his loyalty to Potiphar and, crucially, his desire not to sin against God. Verse 9.
And when she falsely accuses him after he flees, how does she frame it?
She uses ethnic prejudice to her advantage. She cries out to the household servants, "See, he has brought among us a Hebrew to insult us." 5:14. By highlighting his ethnicity, a Hebrew man, she aims to alienate him and cast suspicion on the foreigner. The verb translated insult or mock, sachak, another play on Isaac's name root, can mean to toy with or to ridicule, painting Joseph's alleged actions in the worst possible light as a deliberate and harmful violation.
A calculated and vicious accusation. This leads Joseph to prison, but even there, God's favor continues, setting the stage for Pharaoh's dreams in Genesis 41. How does Joseph handle interpreting those dreams?
When Joseph is brought before Pharaoh, he is very careful to attribute the ability to interpret not to himself but solely to God. He tells Pharaoh, "It is not in me. God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer." After hearing the dreams of the fat and thin cows and the healthy and blighted ears of grain, Joseph again states, God has shown to Pharaoh what he's about to do, verse 25, and God has revealed to Pharaoh, verse 28.
He consistently deflects the credit to God.
Consistently. His interpretation reveals the coming 7 years of plenty, followed by 7 years of severe famine. He then wisely advises Pharaoh to appoint a man discerning and wise to oversee the gathering and storing of grain during the good years, 533.
And Pharaoh recognizes that man is Joseph himself.
Yes. Pharaoh's response highlights Joseph's divinely given wisdom. Can we find such a man as this in whom is the Spirit of God? Verse 38. And then directly to Joseph. Since God has shown you all this, there is no one so discerning and wise as you are. Pharaoh clearly recognizes the source of Joseph's insight, leading to Joseph's immediate elevation to second in command over all Egypt.
A stunning reversal of fortune, directly attributed to God's wisdom working through him, and the grain Joseph stores.
Genesis 41.49 uses a significant simile. Joseph stored up grain in great abundance like the sand of the sea until he ceased to measure it, but could not be measured. That phrase, like the sand of the sea, directly echoes God's covenant promise to Abraham regarding the immense number of his descendants. JG Genesis 22.1c.
Another link back to the promises.
Exactly. It subtly connects Joseph's work of saving Egypt, and eventually his own family, back to the fulfillment of God's larger covenant promises, showing how God is working out his plan on multiple levels simultaneously.
Amazing. This brings us to the climax. Joseph encountering his brothers when they come to Egypt seeking grain. Genesis 42 to 45. How does the text portray their reactions and Joseph's testing of them?
When the brothers find themselves in trouble, accused by Joseph, whom they don't recognize, of being spies, their guilt immediately surfaces. They say to one another, "In truth, we are guilty concerning our brother, in that we saw the distress of his soul when he begged us and we did not listen. That is why this distress has come upon us." Genesis 42.21. The repetition of distress, Sarah, is key. They see their current distress as direct, fitting punishment for ignoring Joseph's distress years earlier. It shows their consciences are finally catching up with them.
They recognize the connection. And Joseph's tests, putting the money back, demanding Benjamin.
Joseph puts them through a series of elaborate tests, seemingly designed to see if their character has truly changed. He wants to know if they still harbor the same jealousy and disregard for a favored younger brother, Benjamin, Rachel's other son, as they did for him. His demand for Benjamin, "Unless your youngest brother comes down with you, you shall not see my face again," Genesis 44.23, forces them to confront their past actions and demonstrate their current loyalty and willingness to sacrifice for Benjamin.
And the cup planted in Benjamin's sack.
That's the final, most dramatic test. The cup is described as the one Joseph uses for drinking and for divination, Genesis 44.5, making its theft seem like a particularly serious offense against this powerful Egyptian ruler. Accusing them of repaying his previous kindness, returning their money with evil, stealing the cup, puts maximum pressure on them.
How do they respond to this final test?
This is where Judah steps forward, fulfilling the leadership potential hinted at back in chapter 38. He offers a passionate plea, taking full responsibility. "What shall we say to my Lord? What shall we speak? Or how can we clear ourselves? God has found out the guilt of your servants." Genesis 44.1. He doesn't blame Benjamin. He accepts collective guilt and offers himself as a slave in Benjamin's place to spare his father Jacob the grief of losing another beloved son. VV 33-34.
A complete transformation from the Judah who suggested selling Joseph years earlier.
A profound transformation. This act of self-sacrifice convinces Joseph of their genuine change of heart. It leads to the emotional revelation scene where Joseph finally discloses his identity. "I am Joseph. Is my father still alive?" Genesis 45.3. He emphasizes the reality by saying, "It is my mouth that speaks to you," assuring them it's really him. And crucially, he reframes their past evil act within God's sovereign plan. "It was not you who sent me here, but God." He then reassures them, telling them not to worry about their belongings. For the best of all, the land of Egypt is yours, demonstrating forgiveness and divine provision despite their history. It's an incredible culmination of testing, repentance, forgiveness, and the revelation of God's overarching providence.
Just a stunning narrative arc. Okay, let's conclude our deep dive with the final section, 3.5. Jacob's final words. Poetic blessings and lasting legacies, covering Genesis 48 to 50. First, Jacob blesses Joseph's sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. And again, he intentionally blesses the younger over the elder.
Yes, it's another deliberate enactment of that recurring theme. Joseph presents his sons conventionally, with Manasseh the firstborn towards Jacob's right hand and Ephraim the younger towards Jacob's left. But Jacob intentionally crosses his hands, placing his right hand, symbolizing the greater blessing, on Ephraim the younger and his left on Manasseh. Genesis 48:14.
And Joseph tries to correct him.
He does, but Jacob refuses, stating explicitly, "I know, my son, I know. He also, Manasseh, shall become a people, and he also shall be great. Nevertheless, his younger brother Ephraim shall be greater than he, and his offspring shall become a multitude of nations."
So it's a conscious prophetic act.
Absolutely. It directly parallels Jacob's own story with Esau, demonstrating again God's sovereign pattern of choosing and elevating the unexpected, subverting human norms of primogeniture. This blessing even becomes the standard for future blessings in Israel. By you, Israel will pronounce blessings, saying, "God make you as Ephraim and as Manasseh." These two tribes, representing Joseph, become the paradigm, the benchmark for divine favor and fruitfulness.
A recurring pattern with profound implications. Now, Jacob's final blessings for his own 12 sons in Genesis 49. These are incredibly poetic and function almost like prophecies for the tribes, right? Can you give some highlights of that poetic imagery?
Definitely. Genesis 49 is a stunning piece of Hebrew poetry, a panorama of prophetic oracles, each tailored to the character and destiny of the tribes descended from Jacob's sons. Let's look at a few. Reuben, the firstborn, is addressed first. Acknowledged for his initial potential, Maimite, excelling in honor, excelling in power, but then condemned for his instability, unstable pakaz as water. Pakaz is a rare word, suggesting something frothy, turbulent, uncontrolled. Because of his past sin of sleeping with Bilhah, Genesis 35:22, Jacob declares, "You shall not have preeminence." Character leads directly to loss of status.
Consequence for actions.
Right. Then Simeon and Levi are rebuked together for their shared violence, stemming from the incident at Shechem. Weapons of violence are their knives, makara tehem. That word makara is uncertain, but some connect it to their use of knives, perhaps even specifically circumcision knives, in the massacre. Their anger is fierce and fury, cruel. The consequence: I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel. Neither tribe received a distinct territory initially. Levi was scattered as priests, Simeon absorbed into Judah.
Again, direct consequences. What about Judah?
Judah receives a lengthy and overwhelmingly positive blessing, reflecting his ascendancy. He's praised as a lion's cub, symbolizing royalty and strength. The key prophecy is, the scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet until tribute comes to him, or until Shiloh comes. This clearly points to the future Davidic monarchy originating from Judah. The imagery of abundant prosperity binding his foal to the vine, he washes his garments in wine, indicates immense fertility in Judah's territory.
A stark contrast to Reuben, Simeon, and Levi.
Absolutely. Let's see. Issachar is called a strong donkey, crouching between the sheepfolds. He bowed his shoulder to bear burdens and became a servant at forced labor. This suggests a tribe perhaps content with material comfort and agricultural life, willing to trade some liberty or autonomy for prosperity, maybe a reversal of the curse on Canaan, willingly accepting servitude for ease. Dan is portrayed ambivalently. He will judge his people, but also be a serpent in the way, a viper by the path that bites the horse's heels. This suggests cunning, perhaps treachery, a dangerous element. Jacob's immediate interjection here, "I wait for your salvation, O Lord," feels like a sudden personal plea, perhaps in response to the grim vision for Dan, or maybe a general expression of hope amidst these complex destinies.
That juxtaposition is striking.
It is. Gad's blessing involves a wordplay on his name. Gad means raid or troop. Gad, a troop gadud, shall raid Yugudenu him, but he shall raid Yagud at their heels. It predicts border warfare, but ultimate resilience and victory for this tribe situated in a vulnerable area. Asher's blessing promises prosperity. Asher's food shall be rich, and he shall yield royal delicacies. Simple, direct, promising abundance. Asher's blessing promises prosperity. Naphtali is a doe let loose that bears beautiful fawns, or speaks beautiful words, Imre Scheffer. The imagery suggests freedom, grace, perhaps eloquence or beauty. The talking deer idea is difficult, so beautiful words offspring are common interpretations, pointing to a graceful, perhaps artistic tribe.
And Joseph, he gets a long blessing too.
Yes, Joseph is praised extensively as a fruitful bough, emphasizing his resilience despite attacks. The archers bitterly attacked him, yet his bow remained unmoved. His strength and skill are explicitly attributed to the hands of the mighty one of Jacob. Jacob showers him with blessings. Blessings of heaven above, blessings of the deep that crouches beneath, blessings of the breasts and of the womb, signifying total fertility, both agricultural and human, reflecting Joseph's role as provider and sustainer. Finally, Benjamin is described as a ravenous wolf, in the morning devouring the prey and at evening dividing the spoil. This paints a picture of a fierce, warlike tribe known for its martial prowess.
It's an incredible tapestry of character, destiny, and divine assessment woven into poetry. Lastly, Jacob's death and burial arrangements. What details stand out?
Jacob ensures his burial in Canaan, the promised land, not Egypt. He makes Joseph swear a solemn oath using that ancient gesture. Put your hand under my thigh, Genesis 47.29, just as Abraham had made his servant swear, Genesis 24.2. It signifies a deeply binding, sacred promise.
And his very last act.
Genesis 47.31 says Jacob bowed himself upon the head of his bed or staff. The Hebrew is slightly ambiguous. The Septuagint, the Greek translation, and the author of Hebrews 11.21 interpret it as Jacob worshiping while leaning on his staff, signifying faith even in physical weakness at the point of death. It's a poignant final image of devotion.
A final act of worship.
No.
And the funeral itself.
It's described as an enormous event. Genesis 50.7-9, a very great company, including Egyptian officials, chariots, and horsemen, accompanies Joseph to Canaan to bury Jacob. This highlights Jacob's immense stature and the respect he commanded, even in Egypt. The mourning period held at the threshing floor of Atad is so significant that the Canaanites rename the place.
What do they name it?
They call it Abel Mizraim, which means mourning of Egypt, Genesis 50.11. This name itself involves a wordplay, as Abel sounds like the Hebrew word for mourning, evil. It permanently marks the land with the memory of this profound grief shared by Egyptians and Jacob's family, emphasizing the impact of Jacob's life and death. It's a final linguistic touch underscoring the weight of his legacy. So, as we've journeyed through these key moments in Genesis, it's really become clear, hasn't it? We've seen how this deep dive reveals these profound layers of meaning woven right into the text's fabric through all those literary devices, the wordplay, the narrative choices. It's not just what is said, but how it's said.
Absolutely. Paying attention to those poetic details, the linguistic nuances, it just enriches our understanding so much more than a simple surface reading ever could. It gives us these amazing glimpses into ancient perspectives, into divine purposes, into the very heart of the human condition as Genesis portrays it.
It really demonstrates how language itself, in the hands of a master storyteller, inspired or otherwise, becomes this incredible vehicle for conveying deep, complex, and enduring truths.
It really does. It underscores that this text, Genesis, isn't aiming to be just a flat historical record. It's a meticulously crafted narrative, designed, it seems, to communicate profound truths through its very form, through the artistry and, yes, the music of its words. It truly invites us to slow down, to listen more deeply. So as you, our listeners, reflect on this journey we've taken through Genesis today, maybe consider this. What new insights, what fresh perspectives might you find when you take the time to slow down and listen not just to what the text says, but how it sings, how its structure, its word choices, its poetry speak to you?
That's a great question to ponder.
We really hope this deep dive has maybe sparked some new curiosity, encouraged you perhaps to embark on your own continued explorations of these ancient texts. There are just endless layers of meaning and knowledge waiting there to be discovered when we approach them with attentive ears and open minds.
Well said.
Thanks for joining us on the deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep listening closely.
Believer talks, let's take a look. Life and hope in every